All right. Once again, thank you for staying with us. And in case you're just joining us, this is Daybreak. And you're just in time for a very important conversation that we want to have right here in studio to shed light on some of the things that are being discussed on the ongoing Africa Climate Summit right here in Nairobi. It is day 3 today, a very important day because we are expecting a declaration that is deemed to be a game changer in the way the continent is going to be addressing the climate change crisis and also paving way for how the continent ought to benefit in the discussions at COP28 taking shape later this particular year. Yesterday, nearly 20 heads of state made some of sentiments that I would say was sort of like a very passionate appeal on their stand on some of the issues affecting the continent when it comes to matters climate change. But of course, it's a summit that is bringing together not just heads of states, but delegates from across the continent and beyond, and experts in different fields. And we've brought some of them in studio and also joined virtually just to be able to tell us a bit about what they are gathering from this particular summit, what are the key highlights, and how does this inform the journey we are taking as a continent and the entire globe in addressing climate change issues. And joining me in studio, I'd just like to introduce the gentleman on my far right. His name is Philip Kilonzo. Philip is the head of policy, advocacy and communication at PACJA. Thank you for creating time for us.
Thank you, Safin, for having me on board.
All right. And we have also in studio Joyce Kabui. Joyce is the Africa manager for Green Hydrogen Organization. Thank you, Joyce, for creating time as well.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And also joining us virtually for this great conversation, we are having Dr. James Murombenzi. He's the chief of section at the African Climate Policy Center of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Thank you, Dr. All right, so just maybe to kickstart this conversation, I'll begin with you, Philip. It's day 3 today. And this is something that has been termed by those who understand its significance as a very pivotal moment that the entire continent ought to seize. We've had quite a number of, heads of states there. Key among them is the Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu saying, let's seize this moment. This is our opportunity as a continent. From your perspective, what would you say are some of the key highlights and the unique issues that shape the summit that is currently happening in Nairobi?
Thank you so much. I think let's first go back to how the summit has been conceptualized and the build-up process to the summit, because those are critical issues that we must keep reflecting on, even as we look at how the summit has been shaped. I think mandated by the 36th heads of states of Africa summit, you begin to see the summit taking some certain other dimensions that are also important, because it took the shape of an investment forum as opposed to being a platform where Africans can actually have real conversation, real dialogue amongst themselves, and to be able to shape their own agenda and strategies for engaging the global North. Mm-hmm. So it took slightly a different dimension in terms of being a discourse on investments and opportunities that are there for conversations on this matter. And then again, in deviation, because essentially it ought to be a space within which Africa is able to galvanize its own interests and begin to see how to engage within the UNFCCC process from a unified front. But that somehow was sort of sidestepped in the process, and indeed it became a kind of opportunity to show then what kind of solutions Africa has for the world. That in itself is not only advantageous but also dangerous. Dangerous in the sense that then Africa begins to take responsibilities for atrocities that were committed by global North in terms of emissions and keeping the emissions going up. That in itself then begins to determine then what kind of solutions is Africa offering for the world, and do those solutions mean that Africa bends backwards in terms of its pursuit for accountability from the global North in terms of its pursuit for climate justice and in terms of ensuring that the North meets parts of its reparations for climate atrocities. So that is the kind of departure that the conference took right from the onset. And whether it's going to be remedied then within the remaining period remains to be seen, especially from what comes out of the declaration.
Just for clarity, I just want to ensure that I got you right there. Are you then saying that Africa should not add its voice to the global solutions that are required to mitigate the impact of climate change?
That is not exactly the case, and that is not what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Indeed, Africa has been part of the solutions right from the onset in terms of demonstrating to the world that it can help in sequestering the carbon. That has been part of the solution. It has a solution in terms of its potential around renewable energy, which is quite massive, and its youthful population and its vast resources in terms of agricultural lands, which actually can generate a lot of food for the world, and its mineral resources to support just transition. Those are inherent contributions that are quite apparent. But essentially what I'm trying to amplify is that Africa in this particular engagement should be and should not deviate from the imperatives of climate justice. Mm-hmm. The imperatives of climate justice demand that the northern countries who emitted more then take more responsibility. And these are things that are well articulated within the Paris Agreement and its principles in terms of what the North needs to do to ensure that we keep global temperatures down, and what it needs to do in terms of making climate finance accessible to countries that are worst hit and worst affected by climate vagaries. Africa and African countries are those countries. Thanks.
All right. Let me come to you, Joyce. We are into the third day, 2 days so far. What is it that is standing out for you as, some of the gains that probably as a continent will be coming out with from this summit?
One of the things I see that has been coming out of this summit, there has been some consistent threads that we've been seeing, and even language. For instance, climate positive growth, green growth, climate finance, investment, and speaking to what the colleague has said. So it's a different kind of conference where we've actually come and said, we're here, we're at the table, these are our assets, and we want to contribute to the decarbonization agenda. And really appreciating that it's not going to happen without Africa's assets. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we're saying that boldly and courageously and saying we want to be partners in this, what we are trying to do in terms of decarbonization, that has been phenomenal. It feels different. It's not the same way when we go to COP and our voices are not as strong as they are at this climate summit. And I'm looking forward to us meeting the commitments that have been made. And that's actually today is such an important day because it's really good to see what comes out of the declaration, because that really dictates what we're going to do for the next 5, 10, 50 years to contribute towards the decarbonization agenda. I also see that His Excellency, President Ruto, has been consistent throughout his what he wants to see Kenya and Africa do in his capacity as the chair of CAHOSC. And that shows the commitment and the political leadership that we're going to receive in the decarbonization agenda. And it's really also good seeing the number of people who are interested in the summit. Again, the numbers were overwhelming, which again also shows that quite a number of people are willing to be part of the solution, which is really, really fantastic to see us want to take leadership a little more than we have in the previous days here.
All right, thank you for saying that. And just coming to you, Dr. Murobenzi, there's been this concern that the African narrative has not been given space in the global discussion on matters climate change, and even things that should inform policy and governance issues on matters climate change. This conference that is happening in Nairobi, how pivotal is it in pushing the African voice and even just amplifying it in the global space?
Indeed. There are many frustrations but the progression of implementing climate actions is provided by Paris Agreement. So there are frustrations that climate finance that is provided for by the agreement is not being delivered at the rate that was agreed and in the quantities that have been. There are also frustrations that the continent is least responsible for climate change, is experiencing the impacts from climate change, and yet there is very little for adaptation to the impacts of climate change. I think there is quite a great deal of hope that this conference is going to contribute towards unlocking new forms of private finance, new forms in terms of crowding in the private sector, new forms in terms of channeling financing towards those most critical areas that the finance is required, but also towards contributing to the finalization of the loss and damage facility, which is going to be a main aspect of the COP28 that is coming up in UAE in December. So this conference here certainly helps to amplify African voices. It helps to amplify African priorities, but also to engage the global community on climate change on the terms of the continent. It is being led by the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change and the Africa Union, and in that sense it also brings a very high level of political concern and political focus on what needs to be done in order to quicken, to hasten climate action on the continent.
All right, just to stay on you, do you think the continent has a capacity to understand this crisis? And, what are some of the missed opportunities that you feel we have in our continent in terms of addressing this particular crisis? Things that going forward we should begin to take more advantage of with regards to how we are going about this issue?
The continent understands the crisis, definitely. This is the most impacted continent in terms of just the impacts of climate change on economies. We understand that Africa's economies are losing up to 5% of their GDP every year due to the impacts of our climate change. We are losing infrastructure. People are dying as a result of the impacts of climate change. People are losing their livelihoods and so on. But we also have many continental institutions that are working on not only understanding climate change, but also designing solutions to the climate challenge. And this is why this conference is actually focusing on African solutions, because we think we do have many solutions. We are already paying for our own adaptation, and all we need really is for the global community to recognize their responsibilities, to recognize Africa's conditions, and to ensure that the continent has sufficient support to adapt to already occurring climate impacts. There are many missed opportunities. For instance, the $100 billion a year that was promised for Copenhagen and then at the Paris Agreement has still not been delivered in full. The world is missing opportunities to deliver climate finance in a way that can actually prevent many of the losses that are occurring. There are missed opportunities also in terms of addressing loss and damage. This is a conversation which started way back in Warsaw and is only now going to be finalized several years later. There are also missed opportunities in terms of the target of the 1.5 degrees. We know that Africa is warming at a rate that is almost double the rest of the globe. And if Africa is going to stay within the 2 degrees guardrail of the Paris Agreement, then it is very, very important that everyone begins to move towards net zero. We accept that developed countries need to achieve their net zero targets quicker than Africa, because Africa also has to develop, has to achieve certain levels of development before we can reach the net zero target. It seems to me that we are possibly missing that target of 1.5 degrees because of the slow rate at which developed economies are transitioning their economies towards net zero. But these are the issues that this current summit is seeking to resolve, and hopefully there will be. The Nairobi Declaration is going to clarify what we will do in Africa, but also what everyone else is expected to do in order to ensure that this is a sustainable climate solution.
All right. Thank you so much, Daktari. Indeed, we are looking forward to that Nairobi Declaration just to see what it contains for us as a continent. But we'll continue to have this discussion in studio in just a bit. We allow us to just take a very short break right now on Daybreak. That was just a teaser. Do stay with us for more. This is coming back shortly.